Welcome to the first installment of the Graceland University Humanities podcast series. I'm Tim Robbins, Assistant Professor of English at Graceland University. For today's conversation, I'm joined by my colleague, Professor Daniel Platt, and we're talking with Ognen Cemerski. Ognen received his bachelor's degree in English literature from Graceland College in 2000. He's now a lecturer of translation and interpretation in the Department of English at St. Cyril and Methodius University in Skopje, Macedonia. Ognen has just published the first Macedonian translation of Herman Melville's 1851 classic, Moby Dick. I'm Tim.
I'm Dan.
Thanks so much for staying up so late.
Well, no, it's actually early for me.
Okay. That's great.
The night is young.
Excellent. So I'm excited. Dan's
Yeah, I'm
excited
really
to hear
excited.
about this. So
Yeah.
maybe start with just a very brief background about how you ended up at Graceland, your relationship with Barbara and John Wallace and Jerry. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. These are good memories. So back in 1997, there was an announcement about a scholarship that Ambassador Menzies was awarding jointly with Graceland College, and it was Graceland College at the time. And I was a bit skeptical about the criteria and stuff like that, because not everything went smoothly here. And I thought that there would be corruption and stuff like that, as things were, and sometimes are still done here. I did all the tests. We had to submit all sorts of documents, and I got the scholarship together with 10 other people from Macedonia. And so we all flew to the States, and we spent 2 years there, and it was great, and I loved it. And then I met Barbara, was my English lit, 19th century English literature teacher, and there was John Wallace as well, and Jerry D'Annunzio. And as time went by, there was war in the neighborhood of Macedonia, and we were all alone there, thousands of miles from home. And Graceland is a small community compared to the university here.
Right.
But nevertheless, you do get friends. You make friends, but there's a certain limit to where you actually, how far or how close you get with students and friends and etc. And we all lacked this sense of security because they were bombing just across the border, and there were hundreds of thousands of refugees flooding Macedonia. Right. So we were so frightened about what was going on here. And there you have Barbara and John, and doing really subtle acts of kindness, nothing condescending or pity, but small, tiny acts of kindness that really count. And you get that sense of belonging, and of I was 20 something at the time, and you still need a mother or a dad even then,
Right.
Especially when you're so far away. And somehow I did get to feel that I had somebody really close there, and they opened their homes to us. And then you get into all sorts of discussions about literature, life, and jokes and stuff like that. So it was really great, and I got to love them very much, and I remember them fondly. And I talked to Barbara and sometimes with late John.
And was it Jerry D'Annunzio who first introduced you to Moby Dick?
Yeah, well, yes, that's another interesting story. Jerry was, he taught 19th century American literature, and of course I was an English major here, where I started English language and studying. I was also an English major there, and Jerry's class was really great, and I loved the way he spoke. I hope he speaks that way still, and he was really calm, and you know, his language was really rich, and so I had a friend who now lives in New York, also from Macedonia, Zlatko, and we were in his class together, and every now and then we would hear an interesting phrase that we didn't know, or that sounded really great, and we would just comment. Translate it in class while he was speaking, so he would give us a look, you know, what are you doing? And he didn't know that we were actually admiring him and talking about the way he spoke. So it may have seemed rude to him. So Jerry, apologies for that, but we were really admiring you. And so we read all sorts of stuff, and we read excerpts from Moby Dick, and those excerpts were not enough for me. So I bought the entire book, because we used the Northern anthology, and I said, well, this is not enough. I need to read the whole thing, and I did. And working in the library helps, you know, because I was a librarian for a year or so. So it helps when you're there and you can read it. So he introduced me to Moby Dick, and I loved it, and he covers it really great. And I said, I have to translate this thing into Macedonian.
When did you start?
It had been translated actually, but in 1982, but not directly from English, which I came to understand later. It was a very poor translation.
Interesting.
Yeah, and you know, a translation from a translation is, you know, talking to somebody's shadow.
That's great. So when did you start the translation project then?
Well, I read Moby Dick in 1999.
Okay.
And I said, I have to translate this, but it wouldn't be so easy. You see, this guy, Herman Melville, had touched virtually every word in the English dictionary. And I didn't know every word in the Macedonian dictionary. And many of the words he had used did not have translation equivalents in the Macedonian dictionary. The Macedonian language may have had the words, but they were not in the dictionary. And so I realized actually it wasn't a problem of the Macedonian language. It was the problem of my lack of knowledge of that language, my native tongue. And you know, it makes you humble when you read stuff. You say, okay, fine, I understand this from context, and I can get the drift of the thought and the meaning from context, and but not when you translate. You have to get every word, you know, and not only every word, but every subtle way it relates to other words, and so I started to learn Macedonian, and the best way to do it was by reading lots of Macedonian stuff, talking to old people, and writing down every new phrase, every word, every collocation, every idiom, every saying that I came across. And I learned that these peasants somewhere were actually great teachers. Yeah. And it makes you even humbler, you know. And so there was the problem of maritime terminology. Macedonia is a landlocked country, so we never had a fleet, and so I needed to see what to do with that, and how do you translate something into a landlocked language. And I decided that I had to speak with fishermen, because we have lakes, quite 3 lakes. 2 of them are rather big, really, and they do sail there. And so I said I'll talk to fishermen and see how they spoke, and I did that, and then I travelled the Adriatic coast, because my grandfather is from Montenegro, was from Montenegro, and I do travel there to the Adriatic coast, and I spoke to fishermen there and to sailors there, and you have to know that these are all Slavic languages, and there is this continuum of Slavic languages, and they're all related. So we do share the vocabulary to a certain degree, and so I got to talk to old people there and write things down, and then I started to research how the maritime terminology developed in the English language, and I came to understand that it was an it came from an international language, from a lingua franca. They spoke in the Mediterranean, because merchants had to understand each other, so words travelled. And then I opened the great Oxford Dictionary of the English language. You have its historical grounds, and you have the etymology, and I realized that, like as in Macedonian, so in English, the words denoting parts of the vessel came from land, actually, and most of the spars and poles and beams on the masts actually are named with words that mean branch. Okay? And the masts are the words for masts are all mean tree or trunk, But then these words in the English language are from Old Norse, from Swedish, from Old Danish, from Middle French, Middle English. Yeah. But they all mean either trunk, branch, okay, or something. And if you investigate further, you see that these are all words that are used in roof construction, horns and stuff like that. Yeah. And so the words that fishermen used in Macedonia also originated from land and from roof construction and from farming implements like windlass. Okay. Yeah, that's fascinating. You have that on wells. Yeah. Right. And you have it on a ship. Yeah. So you haul in an anchor, and you also use it to haul the bucket. Okay? So these are all farming implements that people used before they had ships. And then slowly, over centuries, these were moved onto ships. And the ship grew like a structure, like a house. So you have a basement, actually, and a roof, and the structure there. And languages work in the same way. People are smart. Yeah. They think pretty much the same all over the world. And so you can see how these languages converge and meet at a certain point, and that was my discovery. And so I did the same. Now I had to compensate for something that had not happened in Macedonia spontaneously over centuries. So I had to come up with these terminology myself, and it worked because I did borrow from the language of the fishermen, and used the same model, and it worked.
That's amazing. Yeah.
It's a really incredible story. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
And it took me 10 years.
yeah, that was my
follow-up question.
yeah. Wow. Okay. I mean, two things that I just want to that are amazing about that story. One, Melville's language was already international, right?
Yeah.
Because from what you found, and searching for an author who's now become the author of American letters, fiction, sent you deeper into Macedonian culture and language, which I think is just fascinating.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's one. You've touched upon a very important point in translation. What language you translate from? Do you translate from one language or from a number of languages? Now, if you translate Herman Melville, who relied a lot on John Milton,
okay,
who admired John Milton in Paradise Lost. Actually, Moby Dick begins with a quote from Paradise Lost. And John Milton had Latinized the English language, right? That's what Ben Jonson objected to, and they criticized him for that. So you actually translate also from Latin, and you also translate from the languages of all the islands that Melville had visited, because he did use many words from there. And then Melville actually revived idioms. You see, you take idioms for granted, but they were at a certain point in time they were metaphors, or there were gems that some genius had thought of, and they were new. And all of a sudden, and over time, they become petrified phrases that you use in everyday language. But then you have Melville, who puts them back in context. And, between the devil and the deep blue sea, maritime thing, the devil is one of the beams, the outside of the ship's hull, and the deep blue sea is there. And imagine you being a sailor and having to scrub there and clean the hull of all the barnacles and stuff that make it sail slowly. And you had to get rid of those. And it was a hell of a job doing that in high seas, because they didn't ask you. They didn't, if you complained and said, well, I'd rather do it tomorrow because tomorrow we'll have smooth seas. They say, no. Get there now. So and he used all these idioms that he revived and made them alive, and you have to identify every place where he does actually that, and then you don't translate it with a Macedonian idiom, because he defamiliarizes it, he revives it, and you have to do the same. You don't use a petrified phrase that actually is commonplace, because what he does is no longer commonplace. Yeah,
I mean that sort of. Well, I mean, I have two questions. I don't know if you have one. I mean, one which is practical about Moby Dick, which was what were the sections or chapters or moments that caused you real trouble, the most trouble?
Yeah, listen, I mean,
all of them.
Oh man.
Well, you see, Melville combined the Quaker idiom with the idiom of the sailors.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the Quakers talk in an English from Elizabethan times. And now you have to have that in mind, how they actually pronounced things. Darsh blues, right?
Yeah.
That's how they spoke in England in Queen Elizabeth's time, in Shakespeare's time, actually. And so you have to strike that, do the same in Macedonian, actually, and use archaic phrases as well, archaic language. And you have to resort to Old Church Slavonic. You do that to make these characters sound like Quakers, using biblical phrases in biblical language, and there were on virtually every page there is an instance like that. One of the most difficult chapters was well, I actually have it here.
Oh, great.
It's the Spirit Spout. It's chapter 51. Well, it's full of alliteration. Every word, every in the second paragraph, there's the sounds, the s sound, which makes you hear the sea. Shall I read it?
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, you can edit it out always.
No, no way.
That's it. Let me put on my glasses. Just a few sentences. It was while gliding through these latter waters that one serene and moonlight night, when all the waves rolled by like scrolls of silver, and by their soft, suffusing seethings made what seemed a silvery silence, not a solitude. On such a silent night, a silvery jet was seen far in advance of the white bubbles at the bow. Lit up by the moon, it looked celestial, seemed some plumed and glittering god uprising from the sea. Fedallah first described this jet. For of these moonlight nights, it was his wont to mount to the mainmast and stand a lookout there, with the same precision as if it had been day, and etc., etc. You see, you have this.
Yeah.
This wasn't a boat with an engine.
Yeah.
It was quiet, and you heard the sea and the hum of the sails, and you have to transpose this into the Macedonian, and you have to use words beginning with C. Use achieve the same alliteration, and that is actually on every single page, and it's poetry.
Yeah. I mean, are things like, so alliteration has been a mark of English style for, centuries. Is it true in Macedonia?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Every literature does it. It's a useful device, and the English didn't invent it.
Sure, of course. Just that, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And also, it's another thing that a translator has to be very careful about is recognizing intertextuality. When Melville actually refers to earlier literature, such as the Odyssey or Shakespeare.
Yeah, I'm curious. You mentioned Melville's Debt to Paradise Lost, and I'm curious, did you find yourself looking at Macedonian translations of Milton?
That's where I'm getting it, actually.
Yeah.
But you have to recognize it, because it's not always marked with or explained in a footnote. And so, yes, you have to do it. And fortunately, the translator of Paradise Lost, Dragi Mihailovsky, was my mentor. Learned so much from him. And so it was a very fortunate coincidence that his masterpiece, he actually translated the complete works of Shakespeare as well. And so it's a very happy coincidence that that the lines from Paradise Lost open Moby Dick, and here I am, translating Moby Dick, and yes, and when for example Ishmael says about some books that they were full of sound and leviathanism, signifying nothing. It's a direct reference to Macbeth, full of sound and life, but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more, etc., etc. Full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
Yeah.
And you have to recognize that. If you don't, you've missed an important thing. And then you refer back to the translator, to the translation by another translator, and you have to adjust it, because Melville had done the same. and also he refers to the Odyssey and here it is, the Odyssey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious about whether your personal interpretation of the novel affected your translation. I mean, your sense of certain characters and how they fit in, or different kinds of lenses that you use to interpret the book as a reader or as a lover of literature. Did you find that biased your translation in any way, or was it hard to get past that?
Well, I worked on it for 10 years, and being a translator, you have to be hysterical. And not only hysterical, but also, what's the word? Schizophrenic. You have to get from one character into another character, and you have to change the language. And Ahab speaks in a certain way, and then you have Stubb.
Yes.
and Flask, and all these characters, or Bildad, who mixes biblical and colloquial and whatnot. And you have to do that. And but actually, what you're faithful to is that which Melville abandons in the commonplace. Okay, the commonplace that he abandons, and that is what affects you, and you're faithful to that, and you have to adjust the style to the style of the original, of Melville's language. If it's archaic, then you're archaic, and your translation. Does this answer your question?
Yes, yeah. I think your observations about matching tone more than meaning, often more you go with the one over the other sometimes. I think that is important, and that justifies some of the decisions that you might make as a translator.
Well, yes. If we can dwell on this a bit longer, can we?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. Oftentimes you don't deal with meaning because meaning lies in the dictionary. You have the denotative and connotative meaning. What you have to deal with is the lack of meaning, okay, or the multiplicity of meanings, or the multitude of meanings. And oftentimes you have to leave the text as open to interpretation as the original. Because if you wish to capture a single meaning, then you have to decide. And oftentimes the narrator says something that may mean one thing or that may reflect his or her intention. But the words combine in such a way that they also mean other things. Now, whether that was the intention of the author is uncertain. Oftentimes, things come out as Freudian slips, etc., in ordinary speech, right? In everyday speech. But when you write things down and you re-edit them and edit them, a lot remains unsaid. And you have to ensure that this happens in the translation as well. And if you use a neologism, or if you use a certain word in a new way, then you disturb the commonplace, the domesticating powers of everyday usage, and you have to do it in translation as well. And it happens in Moby Dick all the time.
Yeah. You mentioned in our exchange about how important it was to, as you said before, defamiliarize even the Macedonian language for readership. Based upon my question, which was, wouldn't your aim as a translator in some way to make a text accessible for an audience that wouldn't otherwise read it? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting. And thanks for asking the question because, that's especially the case in American and English translation literature and publishing. Translations are judged by their fluency. So if it reads fluently, smoothly, then it's a good translation. But that's not true. Because Paul doesn't read fluently in English.
Right.
Yeah. How difficult is Moby Dick for native speakers? I'm curious.
For me, I'm still impenetrable, basically. I don't know.
I taught it last semester, and students were challenged by it. And I think a lot of them were rewarded by it, but rewarded because of the great difficulty that they're undertaking. And I think
exactly
that bears out in your translation philosophy.
Yeah, otherwise languages don't grow, and people don't grow, right?
Yeah.
And so making it easy for the reader is the worst thing you can do.
Mm-hmm.
You don't do that. You don't break sentences in half because Melville has decided to, keep going for a page or two, right? You say, okay, this is a single sentence, and my reader will find it difficult to read. Well, who are you to judge the intelligence of the reader, right? Okay, it's not your place.
Yeah.
And you owe it not to Melville but to the text, because Melville is dead, right? He's in the ground. But you owe it to the text, and so you go on and you run on for a page or two in a single sentence. And there is no average reader. Who's the average reader? Is it the farmer in Iowa or the surfer in California? Or is it a professor with a PhD degree, or is it a farmer who doesn't have a PhD in literature? So, Melville didn't concern himself with the reader. He's demonstrated it by writing such long sentences. And why should I do that? Why should I make it easier? Why should I insult my reader? Okay, and that goes for vocabulary. You don't translate a difficult word, a word that doesn't exist in the Macedonian dictionary, because the concept perhaps doesn't exist as it is in the English language. You have to coin a new word using the instruments in your language and word formation and stuff. And this is shown, for example, and your lit majors, I'm sure you know that kennings are the trademark of Old English and of modern English as well, and so Melville relied a lot on kennings, which date back to Beowulf, and so you have the whale road or whale path, right? But it was Hranrad in Old English, but modern English has to conjoin these two elements of this compound word with a hyphen. Old English didn't do that, right? It was a single word. Macedonian word formation allows me to do that, and I can invent and coin words. And so you see how Old English is a dead language, right? Yeah. It survives in certain layers of the English language, but then in Macedonian it is revived. Why? Because the word formation reflects the Old English, although they belong to different groups. And now you have Old English rejuvenated and living in a Macedonian translation. So you see how languages grow, and thereby I introduce new words into the Macedonian language, which are readily understandable to the reader. Okay?
It's amazing to think of Melville's text then growing language into the future. I mean, that's really profound, I think.
Yeah, and that is the purpose of translation, and that's the great project that Melville talks about in his book, like the Cathedral in Cologne. See, great works are never, projects are never finished by a single generation. These are minor works that a single person can complete. Okay?
Yeah.
They do not last very long. Well, that's not absolutely correct. But it relies on earlier works, and Melville's book is a phase in the development of literature and of languages. And so Melville ensures the survival of languages and of many English words, actually. Mm. He's been praised for that. And so translations helps these. And this has happened with all these archaic words that I've had to use, and even modern ones that are frowned upon because they are of Greek origin, for example, and they say, oh, okay, that's a foreign word. Well, it's a good thing. Why? Because the Macedonian, we have a number of words for anchor, and the English word anchor is from Greek ankyra, mm-hmm. and in Italian it's ancora. But we have a word that derives from another Greek word, sideros, which also means anchor, but is no longer used in the Greek language, and it meant iron. Yeah. And iron is actually a metaphor, mm. Or rather a synecdoche, because this part, the iron, stands for the whole thing, mm-hmm. for the device, yeah. Right? Or metonymy, whatever. Mm-hmm. And so this word survives in the Macedonian language with that meaning, that sense, but no longer in the Greek language, mm-hmm. right? Greeks don't use it anymore. Mm-hmm. And see how these words shift from one language to another, and they survive. And the ultimate project or purpose of translation is the survival of languages and the growth of languages, and their potential unification into a single language in the future. Mm-hmm.
This seems like a good time to ask you about your next project, to kind of build on that, if that's a question you're willing to answer. Or...
my next project is Herman Melville's Billy Budd.
Oh, wow.
Benito Sereno, and a few other things by Herman Melville. So I'm keen on working on that too. Yeah.
I feel like the Macedonians need a Bartleby, maybe.
Oh yes, Bartleby the Scrivener, I My Chimney. Bartleby, yeah. I've actually translated Bartleby the Scrivener.
Oh, neat.
Oh.
Yeah, but it was in preparation for Moby Dick, and I've started working on Billy Budd as well. But I did it in the early stages of my preparations. It was just getting into the feel, getting into the style of Melville, and I didn't intend to publish them immediately. They're in my drawer, or rather my computer. They haven't seen the light of day yet, because I don't want to publish them, because I've now matured to work on them. But they were a preparation. So Bartleby the Scrivener, Benito Sereno, Billy Budd. And there's another thing that I want to say, if you have time.
Oh yeah.
That translation is important, not only because it brings Melville or Shakespeare into Macedonian and people have good things to read and good stories, because the story of Moby Dick is, we've heard other stories about the hubris of challenging God and nature, or call it whatever you want, and eventually, you die. Okay, in the end of the book, or after the end of the book, you die. So they lived happily ever after, but they die. Okay, so every story ends with death, but what's important is the things in the middle, And in translation, what is important is that translation affects life, its ideology, its politics. Translation is politics, because the word you choose to use and the way you translate things affect institutions, affect life. If you use commonplace, everyday language, that which you think is natural for your language, then you're actually domesticating foreign cultures, and you shouldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because South American literature is not United States literature. The language they use there is different, right? The concepts, the approach to things is different. If you make it run smoothly in English, then you're depriving what is the text or your audience, your readership, from what is typical of that other culture that you're trying to bring into the English language. And domesticating things, making it sound English, is a colonialist thing to do, right? You colonize other cultures.
Mm-hmm.
You adjust them to your own culture rather than letting them affect your culture and enrich it. So if you do that, if you make everything sound English, it means that the whole word is English.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't, is it?
Well.
Or American. It isn't. It's not the whole world is Macedonian. I've had to let English or Melville affect the Macedonian language.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because that's the only way a language can grow and a culture can grow, if you receive other concepts.
Yeah.
What you like, you take. What you don't, you abandon.
That's really profound.
That's terrific.
In closing, I would say that it was my great project to work on Moby Dick, and it helped me grow as a person. I was a different person when I started. I met a lot of people while I translated, but it all started at Graceland. In the freezing cold. And I was there tucked under my cover and reading Moby Dick and saying, "Oh, I have to translate." And it all started there. And every time I look at this book or my translation, which I will show now.
Yeah.
It's in 2 volumes actually.
Wow.
Yeah, it is complete with everything, with a prologue, with the excerpts. It all started there, and whenever I open it, I have the Graceland's campus in mind. It just comes to mind.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to all this.
This is brilliant.
This is
learned
my
so
pleasure.
much. Yeah, I had a blast. So it was great to hear you talk about Moby Dick, and I feel like you've given me a lot to chew on. And
Yeah.